Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Medvedow, Executive Director of the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy here at Boston College Law School, along with my colleague Abby Kingo, Administrative Assistant, and our Faculty Director, Professor Dan Kenstrom. Welcome to today's program, Evaluating Transparency in Massachusetts Government. This program is being recorded. I always forget to say that. Massachusetts is one of the least transparent states in the country with regards to public records laws. When announcing this program to the BC law community, I wrote that we are the only state in the country where all three branches of government are exempt from such laws. But I stand corrected. Our esteemed moderator, Samantha Gross, political reporter at the Boston Globe, informed me that Michigan also exempts all three branches of government. And here in Massachusetts, as panelist Matt Victor clarified for me, in our executive branch, only the governor's office is exempt from public records law. So a few tweaks there. Why is Massachusetts so protective of its information? Today, we'll have a chance to explore that question with an extremely knowledgeable moderator and three excellent panelists. I will have the pleasure of introducing Samantha Gross, known as Sam, and she in turn will introduce our panelists more fully. But I do want to say, as I shared with her, I'm thrilled to have the state auditor, Diana DiZoglio, here with us, one of just 6 constitutional officers in the Commonwealth. And I'm delighted to welcome back Jay Kaufman, who's done other Rappaport programs, and our BC law alum, Matt Victor. So now let me tell you a bit about Samantha Gross. She joined the Boston Globe in 2022 and covers state politics and government. Before coming to Boston, she was part of a Pulitzer Prize winning team at the Miami Herald, where she covered the Surfside condo collapse in 2021. Her reporting on the Florida legislature helped change state laws and resulted in significant investigations into the misspending of the domestic violence nonprofit. She was a Toner Prize finalist in local political reporting for her investigation into a sham Florida state Senate candidate who was funded by dark money. She joins us today after having spent several horrific days in Maine, in Lewiston, Maine, where we were supposed to be on a conference call. Sam sent me an email saying, I'm really sorry. I've just been assigned to go to Lewiston, Maine, and my heart just broke for her and all the others. So we're glad to have her back. She hails from Indiana and has a degree in journalism from Boston University. And before I turn the mic over to her, as you all know, I feel compelled to share our next 2 programs with you. So on November 9th, we are doing a debate online only with our colleagues at the Rappaport Institute at the Harvard Kennedy School, part of our Greater Boston Debate Series. Should MCAS be a high school graduation requirement? We have one of Sam's colleagues from the Boston Globe, Mandy McLaren, who is moderating the debate between Max Page, president of the Mass Teachers Association, and Ed Lambert, executive director of the Mass Business Alliance for Education. Ed was also a longtime mayor in Fall River and a state rep. The following week, on November 15th, I hope you'll join us here, same time, same place, for a program called Protecting Children in Massachusetts. The moderator is the Honorable Jay Blitzman. Many of you know him. He's an adjunct here. He's a retired juvenile judge extraordinaire. It should be a very provocative program. I think a few sparks will fly. I hope you'll join us. Lunch then, as you know, lunch is always a draw, will be provided by Anna's Taqueria. And that program is being co-sponsored by the BC Children's Law Group and the Public Interest Law Foundation. And now, please welcome Sam Gross.
Thank you all for being here. Should I
Press that button?
Perfect. Awesome. Can you guys hear me all right? Thank you all for being here. This is a great topic. I'm so glad that we are going to be able to delve into transparency in Massachusetts today. As Alicia mentioned, I'm Samantha Gross. I will be your moderator. She mentioned I'm a politics reporter at the Boston Globe. I've had the honor of talking and getting to know some of our panelists and newly meeting our other, Matt Victor at the end. And really excited to hear about what they have to say on transparency here in Massachusetts. As was previously mentioned, I covered the legislature in Florida for several years, where they have sunshine laws. Basically, everything is open to public records. There's a lot of transparency. So getting used to the landscape here has been a learning curve and has been really interesting. So let's meet our panelists for today. First, to my right, we have Auditor DiZoglio, the current Massachusetts State Auditor. The auditors previously represented the 1st Essex District, which includes the cities of Amesbury, Haverhill, Methuen, Newburyport, the towns of Merrimack, Salisbury, and portions of the town of North Andover. After first serving in the legislature as an aide, as chief of staff for the Professional Firefighters of Massachusetts, and years of work working with local nonprofits and community organizations, the auditor won her first race for public office in 2012. She served 3 terms as state representative for the 14th Essex District. And in 2018, she was elected to the state Senate. In the legislature, the auditor had served as the chair of the Joint Committee on Export Development and the vice chair of the Joint Committee on Municipalities and Regional Government. Our next fantastic panelist is Jay Kaufman, who is a writer, an educator, an activist, all the things. He served in the Massachusetts House of Representatives for 24 years and is the founding president of the Beacon Leadership Collaborative, which is a nonprofit that offers workshops, coaching, and public conversations to enhance leadership skills of those serving or aspiring to serve in the public square. Jay is a member of the steering committee of the nonpartisan Coalition to Reform Our Legislature, which does really interesting work. Really excited to hear more about that. And our last panelist is Matt Victor, who's a Boston-based lawyer, policy analyst, civic technologist, and a former tech consultant who's worked in life sciences, nonprofit research, and blockchain industries. Matt is the founder and project director of the Massachusetts Platform for Legislative Engagement, or MAPLE, which is a digital public platform that allows constituents to participate in their state government, stay informed about bills affecting them, and express their views and perspectives. So really interesting, really excited to hear more about that. So I have lots of questions. I'm a journalist, so that's what I do best. But first, I wanted to allow each panelist to give a bit of an opening statement about their role and what their perspective is on transparency in Massachusetts government, or maybe what transparency in Massachusetts government means to you. So we can start off with that.
All right, great. Well, hi, everybody. It's really great to be here. Thank you to Sam. I appreciate that. Can everybody hear me now? Okay, good. My name is Diana DiZoglio. I hail from the great city of Methuen, right up on the New Hampshire border, up 93 North. If anybody wants to stop by and say hello, I can generally find me there on the weekends. I am the auditor after serving. I've decided to run for state auditor after serving 10 years in our state legislature and witnessing the incredible lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, the lack of accessibility, the lack of equity across state government, in particular in the legislature, where I used to serve with former Representative Jay Kaufman, who's seated next to me today. And I view the auditor largely as a role where we could help to increase transparency and accountability for families just like ours who are around the state of Massachusetts. Massachusetts want nothing more than a seat at the table, want to be able to participate in something we call the democratic process, but that in reality really is not democratic in nature at all from my experience up on Beacon Hill. I ended up running for auditor, recognizing that the auditor in Massachusetts is not someone who sits in a back room counting beans all the time. She's actually the state's chief accountability officer, the one who speaks truth to power and make sure that folks are held accountable across our state entities to all of you regarding processes and procedures. Think quality control, quality assurance with some of the processes and procedures that are taking place in state government. I do tell folks a lot of times when I used to be a senator, folks would come over with a smile on and say, "Oh, Senator, great to meet you." When they hear, "Here comes the auditor," people scatter. So It's been a little bit of a different vibe going up to Beacon Hill, and it's also been a different vibe coming out in the communities with this new title and job responsibility. But the good news is that I do not audit any of you. I audit state government for all of you. So I'm looking forward to working on increasing transparency on all of your behalf in the weeks, months, and years to come, and view this as an opportunity to get to know each other better and talk about how that can best be done. Thanks.
So, good afternoon. I should know how to do this by now, right? Lucy, thank you for inviting me to be part of this. As you can attest, I was reluctant to say yes for a couple of reasons. The first was there's not a lot of daylight between us. We basically are twins in this effort to do something about the status of our state government. So there's not a lot of tension between us in that regard, which is less interesting for law students. I mean, law students like some tension, right? So that was one reason. The main reason, though, was public service is a real calling for me. I'm passionate about it. And I don't want anything you're going to hear from me to discourage you from serving in public life, running for office. I worry that might happen because I identify as a recovering legislator. There's some pretty ugly stuff that Diana and I can and will talk about. And I want that to serve as an invitation to you to come in and do a better job than is now being done, rather than as a reason to run for the hills. Although I can fully appreciate why one would want to run for the hills. So I guess what I want to put on the table at the beginning of our conversation is, since transparency has been a problem for a long time, that suggests it's working for somebody, right? Systems don't get locked into place as effectively as this one has, unless there's some winners. So let me just throw out for you some thoughts about who's winning. For one, I think we are protected by the absence of transparency from some other realities about the state legislature, which is its lack of capacity and an absolutely horrific leadership culture. It's a tops-down old boy network, a kind of world of the sort that you would hope that we have moved beyond, but not on Beacon Hill. By the way, I'm speaking primarily about the House, where I have a lot of experience, a lot of scar tissue. I can't speak as well to the former senator's experience in the Senate. But transparency, the lack of transparency means you don't know how badly the place is operating. So that serves somebody, right? The other group of people that are served by the lack of transparency. By the way, I think when I think of transparency, I think of it as the tip of the iceberg. Behind that, or underneath that, is the lack of accountability, the lack of capacity, and the follow the leader kind of mentality. So those are the sort of underlying issues that exist there. And there are many people who are complicit with that. And I want to confess right up front to having been one of them. So I want to just give you a quick anecdote that might explain something to you about the workings of the place, if not reveal something about myself that I'm willing to reveal. I asked for the chairmanship of the revenue. By the way, I was known, I think I am known amongst my former colleagues as somebody who's can kind of be a nice guy, but it's kind of hard to corral. I kind of rebel when somebody tells me what to do. I've got a pretty strong iconoclastic streak in me. So that did not make it easy to get along with some of the people who just wanted me to say, yes, sir. But I asked for the chairmanship of the Revenue Committee because, having worked on a whole bunch of progressive issues for my first 14 years in the legislature, I got tired of hearing we don't have the money for that, whether it's education programs, or whether it's environmental protection, whether it's social justice issues. We don't have the money for that. That struck me as bullshit. And I wanted to be in a position to take a look at how we raise money and how we spend money. And very quickly came to realize, maybe I should have run for auditor. Very quickly came to realize that our tax system is fundamentally broken and is very regressive. And I wanted to do something about that. And that morphed over time into the Fair Share Amendment that a number of you would know about, that the voters passed just very recently for basically an extra tax on income over $1 million. In order to advance that, which was not a real popular issue amongst my colleagues and which the leadership of the House absolutely hated, I had to stay in the position of chair of the Revenue Committee. And in order to stay in the chairmanship of the Revenue Committee, I had to be careful. I had to limit the number of times I was going to offend the people who I reported to. I had to report to. And that led to the better part of a decade of shutting up about a lot of the things I would like to have spoken out about. It included voting for things that I hated. And basically making some compromises in the name of what to me felt to be the greater good, namely passing this very fundamental and important piece of tax reform. So I became part of the conspiracy of silence, and I am so glad not to be there anymore, so I can finally speak out. But every one of my colleagues, and that Diana can attest to this, has to make choices like that. You pick and choose your battles. And all of the legislators, at least on the House side, are dependent on the support, friendship of the speaker. And if you don't have that, and it's real easy to lose, in fact, almost impossible not to lose. If you don't go along to get along, your agenda is dead, and your ability to do the job you were elected to do disappears. And through it, your ability to advance the issues that you care about and serve your constituents. So they each have to make choices about what they'll say and what they won't say in order to be able to still have access to the speaker. People like Sam are in a similar position. The press, there used to be a lot of press coverage of the State House. Now there's precious little, very good, but not a lot of numbers there anymore. And the press depends on access to information. If you want access to information, you can be locked out very quickly if you speak the truth. So again, to do your job and do your job well, you've got to make some compromises. Lobbyists, same thing. If they don't suck up to the speaker, they can't advance the interests of their clients and they're out of business. Advocates too. I mean, the most passionate advocates have to pick and choose battles as well. So it's all of us are in this mix together. And until there is some, and I hope we'll talk about what we might do about it. But I want you to appreciate the fact that we're up against a sort of a self-defense mechanism to a system that's fundamentally broken. And I still want you to run for office.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be up here on this panel, although it's a rather intense topic. I'm Matthew Victor. It was not long ago that I was sitting in those chairs at Rappaport events eating a free lunch. In fact, it was just like 18 months ago. So I have a very different perspective and backstory and certainly don't have the knowledge of the legislature's sort of inner workings that the fellow panelists do, but I think I've got an interesting perspective here. So I graduated from BC Law. Prior to that, I was a technology consultant with a fatal attraction to campaign finance reform that has led me to go to law school. At law school, I started a student group. Some of you might remember, there was a group circulating called the Good Governance Project. That took students and professors, organized into working groups, and we identified a few pieces of legislation that we wanted to pass in Massachusetts. We started as this group thinking about campaign finance on a national level, and then we realized that we have our own problems in Massachusetts, and that democracy is reform is more than just campaign finance work. So we took these priorities and we made a website, and we asked people to sort of add their comments about these legislative priorities. Down the road, I met some collaborators and partners, the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard, the New Law Lab at Northeastern Law School, which was our incubator. Code for Boston has provided all of our developers. We're an entirely volunteer organization. And we created a website. We launched in April, the Massachusetts Platform for Legislative Engagement, mapletestimony.org. And we have two motivations. So one, as you just heard, Massachusetts has some transparency issues, to say the least. We don't publish a lot of material. It can be hard to access the information that is published. And in particular, for us at Maple, the legislature does not publish public testimony. So the testimony that you submit is kept private. If you want to know what an advocacy organization thinks, it can be difficult to find that perspective. And the process of submitting public testimony is also complicated and can be off-putting. Even if you know how to submit it and who to submit it to and when to submit it so that it's actually read, once you send off the testimony, it feels like you're sending it into a black box. There can be no confirmation that it's been read, that it's been circulated, that the people that you want to read your perspective and learn from you are doing that. So we created Maple. Maple has three goals. One is to create a public archive of public testimony. Two is to standardize the process of submitting public testimony. And three is to foster a digital public space centered on learning efficiently about the legislation that will shape our lives in Massachusetts. This last goal is a little bit softer and kind of gets to our second motivation, which is thinking about our political energy as constituents and students and where it goes online. Right now, your political energy, to the extent you're exerting it, is probably being channeled online through Twitter and Instagram. And those can have their spaces and can do some things for good, but generally they are built for entertainment. They're built for, cat videos and cheap laughs, and for selling advertisements. They're not designed to channel political energy in a meaningful, productive way. They're very different goals, and the designs of websites reflects those goals. So that's why we have such polarizing, siloed conversations on social media that seems to be hurting democracy in the aggregate. So yeah, we launched in April. Encourage you to check it out. We're free to use, open source, entirely volunteer run. We have received about 300 testimonies since we launched in 5 or 6 months. And we're working on some exciting new features, which will sort of get us out of our soft launch stage into our final product. So it's super exciting, and encourage you to check it out and to read and to add testimony. And we're entirely volunteer, so if you're interested in helping out, you can feel free to reach out as well.
So thank you, Matt. That's great. I'm really interested in learning more about kind of how that came to be here at BC Law. But I did want to address something that Jay brought up, which is kind of what's being done right now to, can you guys hear me? What is being done right now to increase transparency in Massachusetts, which as our panelists have noted, there isn't a lot of access. So I wanted to ask the auditor if she could talk a little bit about her current efforts to audit the legislature itself, and hear a little bit about kind of what stage we're in right now with that effort, how that would increase transparency, and what you kind of hope to uncover in being able to look at the legislature in a way that it hasn't been looked at before.
Yeah, so again, there we go. Technology, it's great. First and foremost, I need to recognize Joe Thibodeau in the back of the room, everybody. Can we just give Joe a round of applause? Joe is a fellow, and Joe actually also used to work in the state legislature around the time that I was a legislative aide. He was also a legislative aide in the House of Representatives. He was in the Senate. But he's also experienced stuff. I think he could come up here and talk to us a little bit about what's going on too. But I think that Jay actually explained this very well. A lot of folks feel like they're being held hostage in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, who are elected or staff. If they want to vote their conscience, they may absolutely do so. They're free to do so with the knowledge that their community may be punished and is very likely to be punished as a result, that the bills that they are trying to file, may very well likely not get passed as a result. There are a lot of legislators who feel held hostage. Certainly there are legislators who uphold the status quo and do support the current structure and current system within the House of Representatives and the Senate. But there are a lot of legislators that I know personally who would very much like to be able to, vote for increased transparency, vote for increased accountability, just vote their conscience on an issue, but that you won't really see them deviate from what the Speaker and the Senate President do, even still, because they also have to balance in their mind, is it worth losing the funding for our local senior center or our youth center or our educational institutions? Is it worth losing the opportunity to pass this education bill that I've been working on for several years? Because the reality is that there is incredible retaliation in the state legislature. So you have a lot of well-intentioned people who work really hard, who are really good people, in a situation where it's an unwritten rule. If you buck leadership, you will be retaliated against. You will not have an important assignment. Not only will your office likely be moved to the basement or something like that. We all remember, Senator Ed Markey's conversation. You can tell me where to sit, or a statement, you'll tell me where to sit, but you'll never tell me where to stand. His office was put out into the hallway so that it was demonstrated, this is what happens if you mess with us. That type of thing still very largely occurs, and it might occur in different ways that are a little bit more slick in nature, so that it's not as out in the open, but it very much still occurs, that type of retaliation. So, when I was campaigning, I got asked the question. This actually wasn't something that was part of my original first couple of items that I had listed as things that I wanted to audit, but while I was out talking about auditing taxpayer funded non-disclosure agreements and auditing the MBTA and all these other things that I talked about needing to audit and wanting to audit, I got asked the question, well, Senator, I was a senator at the time, you're part of the state legislature, and we know that the state legislature is one of the least transparent state legislatures in the entire nation, not subject to public records laws, not subject to open meeting laws. They pass bills in the middle of the night. Folks don't get, even a day sometimes to be able to read legislation. Committee votes are not made readily available to people, so they don't know how their lawmakers vote and have to chase their lawmakers to find out. What can you do? You conduct an audit of all these other entities. Will you audit the state legislature? And I said, yes, I will. I do believe the state legislature should be audited. And at the time I said, I believe that this is something that will help to increase transparency and accountability. And we had that conversation during the campaign. Now I can say Sam was around for this. There were a lot of people who disagreed with me on this, who said, you can't do that. You cannot audit the state legislature. It's never been done before. There's a separation of powers, all of these reasons and rationale, including the previous auditor who said that she did not believe that this could be done. Well, fast forward, and we actually found out when I became the auditor, we found out through some research in our office, which included pulling some dusty old books off the bookshelves, literally in the auditor's office, and just reading them. We all remember books, right? Before the online age came about. I know a lot of us read our articles online, and I mean, we have things like Speechify and all this, and that's all great. That's all wonderful. I love technology, clearly. But we have books in our office, and in those dusty old books on the dusty old shelves was a host of previous audits of the legislature that had been done, to the tune of 113 audits that we have found up to this point that we can confirm were done by our office since the inception of the auditor's office back in 1849. There was an audit done nearly annually of the state legislature. So with all due respect, some people, may have thought that those didn't occur before because they didn't know. Some people maybe did know that they occurred and just didn't want to, side on or err on the side of transparency. But regardless, this was something that I committed to doing, and I'm very much still committed to doing. So we have cited precedent of the state legislature having been audited, like every other state entity, by the Office of the State Auditor at least 113 other times previously. We believe that the state legislature right now is not being compliant with current law by welcoming an audit from our office and handing over the documents that we have been requesting from them, like all other entities have. So we have actually solicited during the course of the audit that we are conducting the support of our state's attorney general by bringing this matter to court and asking for her assistance in bringing this to court and representing us. Alongside of that, as we await her decision, I, in my personal capacity, on the other side of the office, this is not my official capacity that I'm operating in terms of the ballot question, I am also pursuing a ballot initiative to bring this issue to the voters, all of you, all of your families, to ask you for your support and to ask you what you think about this, to give you the choice on the ballot when you go to vote in 2024, to say, do you believe that the state legislature should receive an audit from our office? Other states do this. This is something that the state of Massachusetts has done before, but we've received tremendous pushback from legislative leaders who think that they are the only ones in the state who should not be subject to an audit to look at finances, procurement procedures, hiring and spending practices, the way that business gets done, processes and procedures in the legislature. And these are things that we look at in every state entity. We do what's called performance audits. And we look at how to make government work better. And that's exactly what this audit is. This audit is intended to help make government work better, to help the legislature work better, to help them to be transparent, to help them to be accountable, to make sure that their systems are working in a way that they're supposed to be working on all of our behalves, including their own. So we hope that legislative leaders, namely the Speaker and Senate President, will change their tune and will, support and welcome this initiative. But up to this point, we haven't seen that from those top leaders. So we are pursuing court action and a ballot initiative to make sure that we all have accountability and access to information about our tax dollars.
Thank you so much for that, Auditor. And I meant to mention Jay and Matt, if you guys want to jump in at any point, this definitely can be more of a conversation, because I think all of my questions are things that you guys probably have smart, awesome takes on that I think folks would like to hear. So just wanted to put that out there before we continue. But I did want to ask Jay, if you wouldn't mind kind of going back to when you first joined the legislature, I'd be curious to know how the dynamics have changed. The auditor had mentioned that, many, many years ago, there were audits done in the legislature every year. And obviously that's something that hasn't been done in recent memory. I'm kind of curious, like, how you feel transparency and some of the power dynamics at play have changed since you had first taken office. And if there are any certain turning points that you can kind of pinpoint as that led us to be the kind of opaque legislature that we have now.
It's a good question. Let me try to reconstruct the history and not take the next I don't want to create another dusty book for you.
Okay.
I was first elected in 1994, sworn in for the first time in January of 1995, served under a speaker then whose name was Charlie Flaherty. What I remember about Charlie in my first year and a half in the legislature before he turned over the gavel was a real sense of engagement amongst the members. A lot of debate. We would walk into the chamber every day, and there would be a pile of papers sitting on our desk, which were the committee reports about the legislation that we might be debating that day. And those reports included the kind of stuff that Maple is now trying to track down: summaries of testimony, a sense of who the advocates were on both sides of the issue, or on many sides of the issue, and what the committee vote had been on the bill that we were going to debate. So basically, we were given both the information to be engaged in a debate and a sense that was our obligation, that we really needed to know what was going on and cast responsible votes. I think most current legislators would be shocked to hear that. They have not a clue as to what a well-functioning legislature could be like. Because right now, the members walk into the chamber, have no idea what they're going to be voting on. There's no speech, no debate, just a vote, basically a follow the leader vote. And I recall very distinctly walking out of the chamber in my early years, afraid that somebody from the press might ask me a question about what we had just done, and I might not be up to the task of answering that question. Now nobody is up to that task of answering that question. So it's night and day, basically, in terms of the culture of engagement and the expectation of casting an informed vote. I can't speak to questions of audits. I don't know what kind of audits occurred on my watch. I do know that if I were to write the ticket for how we go forward with this, not only would there be a performance audit, I would ask the Spotlight team to follow the money. This is not the clergy sex abuse scandal. This will not be a great movie, but the old adage is follow the money, and there's a tale to be told there about how things have gotten, how the power has gotten so concentrated, how the voice of we the people has been compromised, if not almost eliminated. So bottom line is, I was first elected to what I would regard as a very democratic institution, lowercase d, also uppercase d, but lowercase d institution. By the time I left, I was glad to get out of there because it was anything but that.
Thank you for that walk back in time a little bit. That's helpful to put some context that it was not always this way. Matt, I wanted to ask you we're talking a lot about transparency and how not transparent the government is, and how, or the legislature is, and how, that's changed over time. But in terms of accountability, I'm curious, how you think transparency is linked to accountability, and, why it's important for, how more transparency could let people hold their elected officials more accountable.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, on one hand, it seems kind of clear that we need, if the representatives and senators are our agents in Beacon Hill, we need information to do the calculations to decide whether or not they're advocating on our behalf and expressing our opinions and perspectives well. I think that one of the sort of foundational moments for me in my democracy reformer technology journey was, I guess, 2020 or 2019, going to vote in Brighton somewhere, and thinking that this is the first time I'm at law school, I should know about state and local politics. I'm gonna do a little bit of research on who my state rep is and what their position is versus the person who's running against them. And I found that really difficult to find actual substantive information about the perspective of my current rep. That you could get some information about the opposing person, the candidate, but like voting records, how did they vote on controversial bills? How did they, what are their key things? It was really difficult. Of course, they have their own website, but trying to understand how they're differentiated against other reps, other senators, was nearly impossible. And I felt that without that information, I couldn't really fulfill my civic responsibility of holding legislators accountable to my own beliefs and hopes. So I think that, yeah, we need information to decide whether our elected officials are performing well on our behalf. Transparency is key to getting that information. And that's the lifeblood of democracy. And I think having information available also gives constituents sort of fodder to become engaged. It's almost like a chicken or egg situation. There isn't information available, and so there's really not interesting questions to ask. And so I feel like it's very easy to let local and state politics just slide by you. So with that information becomes sort of an impetus to ask more questions, to get engaged, to get more information, and then to use that information to participate and vote accordingly.
Thank you for that. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah. Thank you.
I think, Matt is to be applauded for seeing an opportunity and jumping in. Another example of the same kind of thing sort of speaks to the challenge that generated an opportunity for somebody else. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 or so years ago, a guy by the name of Michael Siegel started InstaTrack. InstaTrack is a for-profit organization that collects information about what the legislature is doing. They send people into hearings, they do a certain amount of not transcribing, but at least reporting on what hearings offer, if anything. And to the extent that there's information available, InstaTrack collects it and then sells it for a pretty hefty profit. So the only people who subscribe to InstaTrack are the lobbyists. Basically, what that translates into is public information is being sold to the highest bidder. The lobbyists have that information. Members of the legislature, members of the press, unless they subscribe, do not. And it's all of this in a well-functioning legislature, there would be no InstaTrack, because most legislatures around the country have a services bureau that does exactly what InstaTrack is doing for profit. So we, the taxpayers, know we need this information. We'll pay for it. The legislature will essentially monitor itself and report. And then we, the people, can take the information and know how to vote and make our decisions about who our elected officers are going to be and what policies they're pursuing. Here, in the absence of that, Michael saw a great business opportunity. He's made a perfectly good living. Lobbyists are happy with it because they've got the information. And the quick anecdote here, Stan Rosenberg, then Senate president, at one point admitted that he went to InstaTrack to find out something about what was going on with a piece of legislation in his chamber. How perverse is that, right?
It's an interesting point. It's funny. So I'm fortunate at the Globe, we do have InstaTrack. And it's a really powerful tool, and it's kind of astonishing how much they're able to get and post to make a profit. But one of, just like an aside, the interesting thing about InstaTrack is it looks very similar to how the Florida legislature on its own posts bill analyses and transcripts from meetings and committee votes and things like that. And it's, yeah, anyway, it's just
Can I just add in something here, because it's so hot topic here. You're absolutely right. So the legislature should on its own be doing this. You should not have to pay to get access to information about what is happening at the Massachusetts State House right now. This is 2023. There is zero excuse for why a system has not been developed similar to InstaTrack. Doesn't have to be InstaTrack, but just some sort of a system in today's day and age that allows folks to have an opportunity to know where bills are, to know what process they're going through, to be able to access things like testimony, to be able to access votes, and to do it in an online platform, especially to be able to do it in an online platform in today's day and age. There is no excuse for that to not be done. And to Jay's point about just this, the original point about, legislators needing to utilize a system to get access. I'm one of them. I actually had another, it wasn't InstaTrack, but it was, and I'm not going to talk about who was, trying to make the sale, but essentially I was approached about spending thousands of dollars that I did not have on a system to be able to track legislation while I was a legislator. And the way it was sold to me, and it wasn't sold to me, by the way, but the way it was being sold to me was, hey, Diana, you're always bucking leadership. They're going to try to screw you over. So this is a system that can help you to make sure that they don't kill your bill somewhere and you didn't find out about it, or to make sure that you can track what's happening with it, because otherwise that they're not going to do you any favors. So we're here to try to help you out. And it only costs you several $1,000s to be able to find out where this bill is and what's happening to it right now. And you can get access to being able to participate in this democratic process for the low price of, X, Y, and Z. But that type of thing should not be occurring and would not be occurring if our legislature was up to speed in terms of transparency. To Sam's point, other states have figured this out. And no, I'm sure they're not perfect, and I'm sure that they can see areas for improvement as well, right? It's like, when you're in class and everybody's like, well, you got this grade because there's always room for improvement. But what I can say is that, in Massachusetts, to be bottom of the barrel in a state that's as forward thinking as Massachusetts, with amazing educational institutions here like we have, there is no excuse for the lack of transparency that we have in the Massachusetts legislature. It is just that the status quo continues to be supported, and we need more people to stand up and to say this is unacceptable. We need to change the way things are, and this is not democratic. Yeah.
I'll just quickly add a few more points, going back to the accountability, transparency question. I think it's important to point out that we have the least competitive elections in Massachusetts for Senate and rep races. I think consistently for the past 10 years, in the primaries and the general, we have the least competitive, and I think that goes to a lack of information that would spark engagement in our voting processes. And regarding InstaTrack, Maple is kind of InstaTrack in some ways. We definitely overlap. We're trying to be that place that tells you about pieces of legislation. We're working to integrate ChatGPT or LLM software to create summaries of bills, fiscal impact statements, media mentions. If you read an article at the Globe about a specific bill, be able to automatically pull that in, transcribing video hearings that occur in the State House. So we are trying to be that sort of place to go. And I hope that the legislature goes and sort of, but originally we wanted to be sort of like one of the dating apps, like we designed to be deleted. Like we don't want to be doing this. We want the state legislature to do it on their own. Over time, we've realized that if we want to create this digital public space where people can, or that sort of channels political energy meaningfully and collaboratively, I'm curious as to what law students and law professors think about this. But the First Amendment creates a pretty big impediment for a government who wants to maintain a public space on a website, because there has to be some moderation, there has to be some curation that happens, And I think that the First Amendment creates a pretty big impediment for sort of deleting someone's posts, things like that. So that's sort of an open question that I'm curious if, feel free to email me if you've got a good answer. But yeah, just wanted to point out the similarities there.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the First Amendment issue there too, because obviously, yeah, there's a lot to be followed if you're a government agency. I am curious, you mentioned something that leads me into my next question. This could be for anyone, which was about the lack of competitive races. I find that really interesting and I'm just comparing to Florida where I covered before, there were term limits. So every couple of years there were competitive races, and in Massachusetts, there aren't. So we don't have that as much, but I also think that the lack of information, makes people a little bit, more jaded when it comes to elections or just not interested. And I'm wondering if anyone could answer this, how transparency impacts how people trust their government. And like why trust is important to create that healthy democracy, because if people aren't trusting that their lawmakers are doing anything to help them or to follow through on a campaign promise, like why vote? So would be curious to hear your guys' thoughts.
I mean, I can lead on this. If you want to see a competitive race, just look at last year's election cycle for the auditor's race. We were not one of the people that did not have a competitive race, but I do totally agree that in other races, for sure. I mean, we are having a hard time getting people to run for local office, getting to run for things like school committee, running for positions like state rep, for sure. Definitely voter apathy is a concern, and I do believe that trust in elected officials and trust in state government is one of the challenges that is influencing that in some way. And look, when it comes to trusting your elected officials, I mean, I believe that people want to be able to have faith in our government and want to be able to, trust that the person they're talking to has their best interest in mind. But when you vote for someone and they say, I'm absolutely going to go and I'm going to vote for this, but then you can't find access to how they voted after they're actually sworn in, that creates what? It creates a lack of trust, right? And I think, again, a lot of people are well-intentioned and go into that building expecting that they're going to be the champions for whatever causes they campaigned on, only to find within a matter of weeks that, if they continue to champion those causes with the, same level of passion that they did during the campaign season, that it's a surefire way to make sure that those same people that they care about don't get access to the resources that they need. So I think that, we have quite the challenge on our hands, and trust in elected officials is huge. This is one of the reasons why we're, conducting the audits we are. We're conducting audits of, let me see here, I have the list, 122 state agencies currently in my office. We are engaged with different state entities that we are conducting audits of. But the reason why the legislative one comes up so often is because they are the only ones that are refusing to comply with the audit that our office conducts. And what I've said time and time again is, look, the way that we can increase, or a way that we can really increase trust in our elected officials and increase engagement, voter engagement, and decrease that voter apathy, is by legislators complying with this audit and working alongside of our office like every other state entity does, to demonstrate to voters that they don't have anything to hide. Because if you don't have anything to hide, then you would welcome an audit like this. And that would really help. It would go a long way to instill more trust in the voters that they have nothing to hide. We might go in, we might find some challenges, we might find some issues that need correcting, but nothing is being hidden from our office. They would be working with us to help to increase transparency, to make sure you all have a seat at the table. Instead, what we're seeing is the opposite from folks who are leading this legislative body right now. And, that does the exact opposite. So hopefully, again, we can get access, help to increase transparency, and to help to promote trust in the voters who sent their legislators up to Beacon Hill to vote on their behalfs.
To give people a bit of an understanding of what those audits kind of do, like what happens when an agency does comply with an audit, can you run through a few examples of things that, like recent kind of audits that you were engaged in, if you're able to talk about them at all?
Sure, you might have heard about the Cannabis Control Commission being in the press a little bit lately. I don't know if anybody here has experience with cannabis, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you right now. But Cannabis Control Commission here in Massachusetts, it's a newer agency, and we recently conducted an audit to detect pesticides, and if the use of pesticides in product was actually being analyzed correctly, and if product was getting distributed in a way that was in line with current law and current statute regarding how much in pesticides they're allowed to have in their product. And we found that there were some areas for improvement, that products were not always put out on the shelves that were not contaminated with pesticides. We also found that products that had been expired had also been allowed to be put on the shelves for consumers to purchase. That is not okay. We have rules and regulations surrounding those processes and procedures to make sure that the public health and public safety is protected from contaminants and from expired products. So we drafted a report, we worked together with the agency, and we made a set of recommendations identifying the challenges, talking about what percentages we found of the product that were contaminated, and then made a set of recommendations on how to remedy that problem to make sure that it occurred less often or not at all in the future. So generally speaking, when we do conduct an audit of a state entity, we will go in, we will ask for all the documents and the testimony and the resources that we need to be able to identify problematic areas, find out what those areas are, and then we are able to then recommend potential solutions to, again, help government work better. I tell people often, we're not the FBI, so we don't go in and start tossing desks around and like emptying out filing cabinets or anything like that. We go in and we analyze how we can make the processes and procedures better to protect public safety, public health, and just to overall increase accountability in government.
Thank you. I just wanted to give folks a bit of an example.
Another example besides the legislature, yes.
Yeah. So I think we have time for one more question, and then I'm really excited to hear from you all. And this can be for anyone or all of you. I just kind of wanted to ask, what you guys think are the primary challenges, the biggest obstacles that need to be overcome to achieve more transparency in Massachusetts. It's a pretty high level question, but beyond, maybe the stubbornness of those in leadership in the legislature, if there's any other challenges or things that can be addressed by way of ballot initiative or lawsuit or, a bill or a change in the law.
So I have a list here, and I'm not sure how far into the list we want to get, but let me begin, Sam, with you. For one of the first things I would want to say about Diana's initiative is that if nothing else, it will shed some light on the situation on Beacon Hill right now. And for that alone, I'm very excited about it. Were she to have not done this, she would be part of the conspiracy of silence, and we'd hear the sounds of silence. So I think I'm very glad you're doing that. It is a real challenge right now for anybody in any of our communities that the local press has virtually disappeared. The world of journalism is very different than the one that you first imagined going into. And not only are there many fewer people covering the State House right now, there's nobody covering us on the ground locally. That's a real problem for communication and for the kind of engagement that Matt was talking about earlier. And that is the heartbeat of democracy. If we're not an informed and engaged citizenry, then we don't have democracy. And the vehicles for engagement are few and limited and very, very far between. And increasingly, there's a concentration of ownership of the local papers, and they become basically excuses for advertisements. They're just really not covering local races or local issues at all. I remember distinctly in my first term, first time on the ballot, it was very frustrating not to be able to get people's attention because they were busy with thinking about people running for higher office. It's a presidential race, a gubernatorial race. Who cares about your local official? And if you track the people who are voting patterns, in a good year, a local election will get 10 to 15% of the registered voters to come out to vote. So there's not a lot of attention on this, except when there's a scandal. That'll get attention. And I guess if I were in the leadership of the House and Senate right now, I would regard what Diana was doing as scandalous. Because she's daring to challenge the status quo. But it takes that kind of bright light. And we can all do that to some extent as citizens. I think it's going to take some pretty brave people running for office. And making some noise, losing maybe, but making some noise and beginning to generate some interest. So I think anything we can do to encourage good people to run for office, we should be doing. Anything I can do to encourage the Globe and other media outlets to keep the drumbeat going of attention to this. It's going to take time, but absent that kind of drumbeat, absent that kind of focus on the part of the media and on the part of we the people, we're stuck with the status quo. So I guess the bottom line on a democracy, if things are failing, we better look at ourselves because we are it.
Are you ready to first?
So Matt, you want to answer?
Yeah, I'll just go very quickly. I think I agree that it's a personal challenge. I think that in these sort of unstable, anxiety-inducing times, thinking about our democracy, we should challenge ourselves to think about ways we can fulfill our civic responsibility in new ways, because the systems that exist are not providing easy channels to make meaningful impact. So I think there's a personal challenge. And then me as a technology person, I see it as a technological challenge and an infrastructure challenge. The systems are working as designed. We need to change the systems if we want a different outcome. And so I'm thinking about how we can use technology to disrupt the environment that's been created, just like technology has disrupted countless other industries. It has the potential to allow collaboration and information symmetries in ways that have never been created. And I'm also I think another big related challenge is AI and how LLMs and machine learning can, we saw what social media did in the last couple of elections. I think with LLMs in this next one, it's going to be really eye-opening and really scary, frankly. So I think that there's a moment here where we don't know what LLMs are going to do and what AI is going to do.
What is an LLM?
Sorry, a large language model. It's like ChatGPT. AIs that can impersonate people incredibly well, can create images that didn't exist in a matter of seconds. The ability to impersonate, to create fake news and to spread fake accounts. It's only going to get bigger. So I think there's a moment now where things are not set in stone. It's very fluid. We can create new things with it, and I hope we seize this moment before traditional status quo paradigms take effect.
Well, thank you to our panelists for answering my many questions. And I'm really excited to hear questions from you all. So I think we have questions from in person and online. Is that correct? Okay.
We'll start with in-person questions.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is kind of touching on what you were talking about with the fact that sometimes state elections get overlooked in face of presidential elections. I'm a 4th or 5th generation Massachusetts person, and my entire family thinks that we don't need to do anything in Massachusetts. We're so much better than the rest of the country. We need to be thinking about the national scale politics. So I was wondering how you plan to confront that and how to make people care about local elections and politics more.
Well, I totally agree that is a serious problem. I think a poll came out last week that showed that Massachusetts had like the 6th or 7th highest rated legislature in the country, which I thought was very ironic. So I think that there is this cognitive dissonance that you pointed out about Massachusetts, because in a lot of ways we are better, or if you're prescribed to certain political leanings, we are fulfilling certain goals better than other states. But in terms of the quality of our democracy, we're really far behind. I remember during the last election, people donating money to Georgia and posting on Instagram about early voting and voting by mail, and talking about things in Georgia that we didn't have in Massachusetts until 18 months ago. We didn't have those things. So there's this cognitive dissonance, and I think that the traditional line is the beacon on the hill. We want to be a light to the other sister states here, and if we see this as a time of democratic challenge, which it certainly is, we feel this anxiety. We need to be the leaders and to set an example of what quality democracy looks like, and hope that others follow our example. And we also have so many schools and universities, so much technological expertise. If there's a state that can solve this and can be an example for other states, it's us.
We are not Washington. Thank goodness. So I guess I'd start by agreeing with your 4 or 5 generations. We are better off here than many other states, and certainly when you look at the national picture or international picture, we are in better shape. And we are the only state that doesn't have a professional services bureau in the legislature. So the quality of the work that is produced sucks. You heard enough about transparency and the ability of the public to know what their legislators are doing. We're at the bottom of the barrel. We just have to keep putting that out there so that people understand. And I don't know about us showing up as 6th or 7th best in the country, but there are other studies that have us as the worst or among the worst in terms of transparency, the number of bills that actually get debated and passed. We're in terrible shape by some other metrics. We just have to keep speaking the truth, I suppose, and do it in a way. I would want us to do it in a way that encourages new and better ways of operating, as opposed to just dumping on the way we do it. So this coalition for reforming our legislature that Sam mentioned before, our top priority right now, I'm not sure it's the top priority in any global sense, but our top priority legislation right now is something creating a public legislative services bureau to sort of address the underlying quality control issue. Is that the only thing we should be doing? Hell no, but it is something we should be doing. And again, I think the auditor's attempt to shed some light on transparency and accountability is good. It's not enough to say we're one of the best legislatures. We got to get a little more nuanced than that.
And I would just add really quick to this, and y'all know my story around me right now, Sam and Jay especially, but I was born to a 17-year-old single mother. I grew up housing insecure. I was raised mostly in Methuen and Lawrence, 2 gateway cities in the state of Massachusetts. Went through the public school system, went to community college, ended up getting a scholarship to be able to get my 4-year degree, to become the first in my family to graduate, ended up getting a job offer at the State House as a legislative aide during the time that I was graduating, and went to go work at the State House, not because I wanted to get into government or because I knew anything about state government, but because I spoke fluent Spanish and was from the community that a state representative needed assistance in. So he had hired me to help with constituent services because I had done a lot of work in the nonprofit space, and I had a little cleaning business, and I knew a lot of people, and again, I could speak Spanish, so I could work with folks in the community. And I got the job working at the State House, and I learned about all the great things that state government can do, and I also learned about all of the not so great things that state government does. And I ended up learning about all of these things and subsequently running for office after that, and became the youngest woman serving in the House of Representatives at that time when I ran. But I can tell you, I did not even know what a state representative was until I had the job opportunity presented to me. Growing up the way that I did, growing up in the household that I did, growing up in the community that I did not have civic educational opportunities. And that is what I think that we really need to work on in the Commonwealth. We've done some work to increase civic education. It's not like we've done absolutely nothing, but we have done not nearly enough to increase civic education in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have so much more work to do before we can ask folks to consider running for state rep and running for state senate. They need to first understand what those roles are. And we're not doing a good enough job at educating our next generation on what those roles are, why they're important, how they can impact community centers in their neighborhoods, how they can increase education in their communities that they grew up in, how they can help folks struggling with the disease of addiction. A lot of folks don't understand how state government plays roles in those things. And I think that the more we increase access to educational opportunities about how they can make a difference through politics and government, whether it be at the local level or the state level, the more we're going to see people running for these offices.
Can you talk about the urgency of this problem, and particularly, I was really struck, and Jay, you had mentioned this about how, especially earlier in the year, the Globe and other groups covered how we have the least productive state legislature in the country, which I also, as a former staffer who has worked with politicians, understand how that work, it's not just about the bills you file, right? And I know how that can be hit in a personal way for people too, but it's also, as a political activist, something that's really concerning, particularly looking at other states like Minnesota and other places where they have nowhere near the supermajority that we do in terms of Democrats holding office. The contrast is so stark to me. And so in the urgency of it, we have so many problems that are ongoing in our state. What are we losing by not addressing this problem now? And the longer that we prolong it, what are some of the policy consequences that you see of things that are not being funded, or policies that will not move forward, or things that continue to be put aside as there is continued lack of transparency, to instill that urgency in this issue for people to know that it's not just a procedural element, but it's actually linked to all of the policy future of our state?
The definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, right? So one of the reasons why our office is looking to audit the legislature is to look at the processes and procedures or anything else that's lending to the continuation of this lack of accountability in actually getting things done, right? And I've been so grateful to have spoken with even the other panelists today about ways that we can make that happen. I mean, Matt was meeting with our team the other day. We're very grateful for him meeting with our team to talk about ways that, we might be able to look at different things. But I would say we have a lot of work to do, Joe, in connecting the dots for people on what transparency actually means and why it's so important. Just to go back to the theme of this panel discussion here today, who cares about climate change in this room? Okay, there we go. I was hoping to see at least a hand go up. I'm glad. Who cares about transportation? Who's concerned about the MBTA? Okay. Who cares about taxes, whether or not you are on the liberal side or the conservative side? Do you care about taxation and tax policy here in Massachusetts? Okay, so things like this are quite often, more often than not, conversations around these issues are largely decided behind closed doors. These conversations are largely had behind closed doors. And, what ends up happening is legislative leaders will oftentimes leave conversations that are really important to all of us until the very last minute, until there's almost no time left on the clock. And they have to get something passed really quickly in order to get something done. And they will have these conversations behind closed doors, rush something to the floor in order to get it done by the deadline in that legislative session. And other lawmakers who don't have access and the people who don't really have access have to take kind of what's given to them and just say, thanks, we appreciate it. You did something on these issues. But then we wonder why we're in a transportation crisis. We wonder why we're in a housing crisis. we wonder why, we have all of these challenges that we continue to discuss and go, why aren't we, why haven't these bills been passed when they have, over 100 co-sponsors on a piece of legislation? We have enough support to pass the bill. Why isn't it getting brought up for a vote? These are some of the things that we need to be continually focused on addressing, because we have a broken system up on Beacon Hill. But I do want to say that I believe, even though this conversation has been kind of like a little bit Debbie Downerish this morning, because it's like talking about the insane lack of transparency in this state, we are very luckily living in a time right now where we have an opportunity to go and do things like, potentially, if we can get this issue on the ballot, vote on a ballot question to address some of these issues, take action. We have technology that is helping us to spread the word about the lack of transparency. If we don't have transparency about climate change legislation that's going through the process, how can we have an impact on climate change the way we want to? If we don't know about the bills that are going through about the MBTA and where they are in the process, how can we make a difference? So these types of conversations are actually really inspiring to me, because it shows that people are interested, people are starting to pay attention, people are recognizing that without transparency, these other issues that we all care deeply about are left unimpacted or under impacted. And, transparency is the way to make sure that we make meaningful change and not mediocre change. I really believe that we want meaningful change in this room here today. So transparency is the way to do that. And, great question, Joe. Thanks.
We have an online.
Can I just answer? I'll be very brief about this. I have never been involved in signature gathering that's easier than the one that's going on now for this initiative petition. People are lining up to sign this. So they either know there's something wrong, or they're willing to believe there's something wrong and they want to do something about it. So I think the signatures are going to come in. This will be on the ballot with any luck. Having said that, the number of initiative petitions that we, the voters, have to deal with is growing exponentially. That I regard each and every one of those as an indictment of the legislature. Each of those issues should have been dealt with by a functioning legislature, and they have not been. So whether we're talking about the right to repair, or in some environmental initiative, or some initiative, or the MCAS, the debate about whether or not MCAS should be a graduation requirement, all of those are the responsibility of the legislature to debate and decide. And we, the people, are saying, you guys aren't doing your job. We'll do them for you. We'll take out an initiative petition effort. And it's incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive. Another area that we haven't touched on at all, except obliquely, is the need for campaign finance reform. Very sadly, if you look at who spends money on initiative petitions, it's almost always the side that spends the most that wins. So in the name of free speech, we have very expensive speech. If you got the money, you win. If you don't, you lose. So I'll shut up. A lot of work to do.
Yeah, we have a question online. How is the role of leadership in Massachusetts legislature different than other states?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
How is the role of leadership in Massachusetts legislature different than other states?
I can just give a very quick example. In the state of Connecticut, they actually are regularly audited to the point where it doesn't even make the press, generally speaking, from what I've heard about, which is a stark contrast with the state of Massachusetts. So their legislative leaders there seem to be welcoming an audit opportunity to help to increase transparency and accountability, giving access. I haven't done a forensic audit yet of all of these things, but I think Jay might have some stuff to add.
Well, here's an example. When I was the first chairmanship I was offered was the chairmanship of the Public Service Committee, and within weeks of my appointment, all sorts of campaign contributions came into my account from the organizations whose issues were before the committee. I found out about what the issues were before the committee by looking at who was putting money into my campaign account. They thought that if they want to influence the legislation, they had, pay to play. I was kind of blown away. I didn't recognize most of the organizations. And it really didn't make a lot of difference to them in the end. But when I became chair of the revenue committee, I got not a single contribution. I think in part is because I had a reputation as being a pretty progressive kind of guy, and I was not likely to be bought. But more importantly, it didn't matter who the chair of the revenue committee was, because all the decisions were made in the speaker's office. And the lobbyists know that, and all the organizations know that. So if you follow the money, if you look and see who's putting money into campaign accounts and what campaign accounts are accumulating money, you can see the concentration of power through dollars. And the lesson is not at all subtle. And one very quick last point, probably one of the highlights of my 24 years in the legislature was serving on the board of the National Conference of State Legislatures. So I had a lot of interaction with my counterparts from around the country. I found more engagement and excitement across party lines in NCSL meetings than I ever did back home at the State House. They all reported feeling very effective in their jobs, and they didn't win every battle, but for the most part, legislators in other states are fully engaged in their work. Here, not so much, because it doesn't matter.
I think one last quick point, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think maybe the most unique quality is that the Speaker in Massachusetts gets to appoint the chair and co-chair for all of the committees, which also means increasing the staff and the pay of those legislators. I think a pretty notable amount. So, and there's, I think now 85 chair and co-chair positions in the legislature of 160. So a majority. So the Speaker can control the income in some way of over a majority of the reps.
We have a question here.
Hi there. My name is Andre Slave. I'm a 1L here at BC. This is kind of a big picture question, so sorry if the answer is like a big deep breath. Sort of in terms of endgame, what do you all see as the endgame for transparency in the state? Is it a complete revamp of the system, say something like the Sunshine State laws in Florida? Or is it something as simple as complying and expecting compliance with an audit? And then what do you see as the most realistic path to that? Is it court actions? Is it a legislative movement? Is it action at the ballot box? Just wanted to hear your takes on that two-parter.
I love the question. By no means should an audit be the end game. It's just the beginning. An audit will, like I said, we're not the FBI in our office, so we don't go in and start tossing desks around and do whatever. We look at process, we look at procedures, we'll look at the finances, we'll look at performance. That is, we're doing the best we can. We're going to continue to do the best that we can, but it's an audit. And we don't have the power in the auditor's office to force compliance on any entity. So anything that we found in the course of an audit would be, something that would be made public to everybody. Our office is, unlike the legislature, subject to public records laws. It would all be made public and available for your review. But at the end of the day, we're able to make recommendations and not require compliance from the entities that we audit. So it would be left up to the legislature itself to comply. So I think the end game for someone like me, just with respect to the audit, is that anything that we identify is that, the general public, hopefully read what we put forward and work alongside of our office to help make government work better by helping to encourage the legislature to adopt any potential recommendations that would come out of that audit that we produce, and making sure to call their legislators and call their senators to support. I would say beyond what an audit can produce, I think that there's just a lot of work to be done across the board in terms of overall culture at the State House. There's a culture of fear at the State House. And, I can talk about that culture of fear as an individual, and so can Jay, having lived in it, where you fear retaliation against yourself, your district, that you're not gonna be able to get stuff done. There's a toxic work environment there. A lot of legislative staffers have complained about, being harassed or, just having to deal with some sort of abuse during their time in the legislature. We have some legislative staff that's trying to form an employee union right now in the legislature. There's a lot of work to be done in terms of changing the culture to be a culture that is free from harassment, free from discrimination, free from fear of those in power. So an audit wouldn't be able to change that culture, and maybe some things could be highlighted that could, suggest that, some changes to processes and procedures could potentially help in those areas. But there needs to be a cultural shift up on Beacon Hill. And that needs to come from the ground up. That is something that definitely we're relying all of you alongside of us to work to promote change in. So well beyond what one audit is going to do, well beyond, so much work to do.
One of the definitions of a good question, Diana correctly identified yours as a good question, is we don't know the answer. To some extent, it's all of the above. We just got to try a lot of different things. Beacon Leadership Collaborative was created in the environment, the same kind of environment that you're speaking to. My hope is that if legislators have a better, and potential legislators have a better understanding of what leadership really involves, they won't just knuckle under the way they do right now. You talked about the culture of fear. I mean, there's not a lot of job satisfaction that most of my former colleagues, our former colleagues, would admit to in private, at least. That there is something they can do about that. So my hope is to empower them, but more significantly empower you, so that when you challenge them, you will win and be more effective.
And that will be the end of this. Thank you so much. I want to echo what Jay just said. I want everyone to volunteer for Maple. Join one of your former colleagues in his endeavors. Work towards transparency in our state government. And the way to do that, as everyone has said, run for office. The Rappaport Center is all about state and local government. There's so much power in state and local government. I want to recognize Ryan O'Malley, sitting city councilor in Malden, public official. We want people to run for office, affect change. You have the power to do this. Thank you so much to all of you.